We're all still generating frightening amounts of waste, 90% of which is literally wasted. Dutch tech company Seenons offers its clients access to the complete chain of alternative waste solutions to revolutionize their waste disposal operations. It's about the circular economy, and in Seenons' case, the clear ambition of a 100% circular Europe by 2050. I'm Andrew Wilson, and I sat down at COP28 to talk to the CEO and founder, Joost Kammermans. A lot of people here. I mean, this is far and away the biggest COP that's ever taken place.
Yeah, there's people from all over the world really here to make a difference.
What can Seenons bring to the conversations here this time round?
Well, we're here to make sure that we put words into action. So the moment that these CEOs of big companies say, we want to reduce our emissions, we want to reduce CO2 and waste, we got to make sure that we can actually put that into practice. And by helping them dealing with local legislation all over the world, and with our partners all over the world, we can really help them make that difference and put it into action.
Okay, why don't we take this to the studio and talk about it some more? Joost, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, give us an idea, first of all, of the Seenons proposition and how it works, what the client will experience.
Sure. So we help organizations with their waste management, or material management, if you will. So what you might consider as waste, somebody else might consider as a value input to their production process. And by looking at the waste or the materials of these large organizations, we want to guide them and help them to really make steps on the R ladder. So looking at what can we actually prevent from existing in the first place, what can we reuse, are there materials that can be put into use again, or what can we recycle? And if you then recycle materials, you need to connect that with different organizations. And we work with processors, logistical companies, and parties throughout the supply chain. And by doing that, we can help an organization save money, reduce CO2, and save valuable materials.
Can't people do that themselves?
Well, I think if you are an individual and you have very little waste, for example, well, simply it's not worth a lot. So you throw that away and you don't pay attention there. But if you're a large organization and you have locations all over a country and you have separate different streams, by ensuring that those go to the right location, it's very difficult. You would have to work with many, many different organizations. And that is something that we can do because we created all these integrations through APIs with these parties.
So this is pure circular economy we're talking about, isn't it? And that must be a mixture of technology, logistics, and sustainability built in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, for sure. I think what we do is we have technology that allow you to work with all these different parties, but we also have a service component to it because you as an organization, you're trying to become more circular, and you need to think about how am I going to get there? So on the one hand, thinking along with these organizations on the steps that we can take. On the other hand, having the data to look at what is actually worthwhile, what is working, and therefore ensuring the connections with all these different options. That is what that's what we enable for these organizations.
Can you give me an idea of the scale that you're operating at? I mean, when you talk about waste, sometimes I imagine a tin can and sometimes I imagine a whole truckload.
Yeah.
What sort of scale are you operating at?
No, I think that's a very important distinction to make. So, of course, a lot of people are aware of consumer waste, and that's the waste that we all generate. But there's a whole world behind that, which is basically the waste that's generated along the supply chain. And that's much more than that we see at the consumer. The good thing about that is that typically when the waste is being generated down the supply chain, the volumes are very big and the materials are also quite monostream. That make it much better for recycling. And that for us is very interesting to then help these organizations improve that. So typically we work with the largest organizations, such as Cenon, we work with Schiphol, and we also work with hospitals. So you should really think big organization.
So give me an idea of the kind of materials that are passing through your operation, if you like.
Yeah, so this could be cardboard, styrofoam, glass, plastics, you name it. And typically these are materials, for example, styrofoam, that you yourself would never have enough for to really separate specifically in your home. But if you are a large e-commerce player, you might have a lot of styrofoam, and getting that styrofoam separated in the right way and then connecting it to the right party that can turn that into raw materials, that's really worthwhile.
I know you're keen to expand, but currently you work pretty much with a European footprint.
Yeah.
What's the mindset you come across? A lot of people feel that they do everything they can to recycle. Is that true, or are they kidding themselves? Is there a kind of a blind faith element to how people tend to operate with waste?
Well, I think actually both is true, because we are, on the one hand, I think people really try, I believe that, but at the same time we are kidding ourselves because the result is not there. And I don't think it's the fault of people, because it's just been made too complex. Like, separating waste works different, at least in our country, in every city. And I think if you tend to travel, it's definitely different in every country. So doing the right thing there is very complex. And I think that's not the fault of the consumer. I think that's the fault of the system we designed. So I think that governments need to make legislation that make it simpler to separate waste. And I think we also need to go to an incentive system where it actually makes sense for people to separate their waste. Today, I have the feeling that not everybody has access to the right bins, but also does not see the value of these materials. I've done litter picking in my life, and if you pick litter, you find all sorts of stuff on the ground, but you'll never find a $100 bill on the ground. Why is that? Because it has value. And if we can make sure that there's more value into materials, then people will also treat it differently. And that's something I think here at the COP28 is what we need to change. Like, making sure that if you produce a product, that you become responsible of getting that product back and recycling it. Or another solution would be that you say that raw materials become more expensive than virgin materials. And you can do, than recycled materials. And you can do this by simply saying, if you want to sell a product on this market, you also have to put in recycled materials. And that means that the market is created for parties to start buying recycled materials, the value goes up, and all of a sudden there's value in your waste, so you're going to treat it differently.
It sounds like you're talking very much about a kind of partnership between legislation, i.e. government, and the private sector.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's the triangle that we need. It's, on the one hand, it's you cannot solve this as a consumer alone, the government cannot do that alone, and also business cannot do it alone. But I do believe that it's the government that needs to create the system wherein businesses can compete with each other through innovation. Can we come up with innovative reuse systems? Can we come up with innovative ways to recycle things to then ultimately make this affordable for the consumer? But then the consumer also has to play its part and make sure that these materials actually find their way back to the facilities.
Do you think the circular economy features enough in gatherings like COP28, or does it need to be moved up the agenda a bit?
I have the feeling that the circular economy is still relatively new. People talk a lot about climate change in general, and I think that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, we all live in the same world and we will experience the problems with that. I have the feeling that the circular economy is something that might be a bit further away for certain people, but I think it's actually more urgent than people realize. And the reason is, I'm Dutch. When my parents were born, we said we had infinite gas, and the idea was at the time, we'll just use it. Well, with the knowledge of today, it was of course very bad for the environment, but it also resulted in us using all this gas. Now it's very expensive. Warming our houses is really expensive, so we have to insulate our houses to make it affordable. But we should have done that 50, 60 years ago, and then we would have never ran out of gas in the first place. And of course, making the same transition. I think that same issue is going to happen with many other materials. Now we say, well, we have unlimited resources of a certain material. But that's not true. There will come a point in time that we actually run out of that material as well if we never recycle it. If we are not able to recover it, almost any material we will run out at some point.
Is there a particular project that Seenons has got involved with that you're proud of, or is a good example of what you do?
Yeah, I think there's many, but I think one that's quite concrete is, for example, a hospital where we were able to help them save 76% of their residual waste. So making sure that we separated the waste better, finding ways to recover these materials, and really reducing the costs and also CO2 emissions.
So what's your ultimate vision for the world from your viewpoint from Seenons?
I love that question. I see a world without waste. And what does that mean, right? A world where nothing gets thrown into landfill anymore, used as incineration, or even worse, disposed in the ocean. So that means that everything we at least reuse or recycle So making sure that we really go to a circular economy. And I think that's possible, and I think that's why we're here to advocate this future vision that's better for all of us.
You know, by and large, a lot of people play their part. They think, right, I'm recycling, I'm involved. Companies have the same attitude. They have notices all around the offices saying to people, put it here, put it there. But are they paying? Willful blindness is something environmentalists talk about all the time. It's when people think they're doing something right and they don't interrogate that decision because their conscience is clear and they can move on. You're in the business of confronting people's mindset. You're in the business of saying to them, look, you can do a better job. And by and large, what I'm interested in is what kind of mindset do you come across and how do you deal with that mindset in terms of potential clients?
Yeah, I think the will to recycle is definitely there. I think a lot of people are motivated to do so, but I think sometimes they're also a bit skeptical because is the right thing happening? Also, the way that we recycle is different in every city, in every country. So therefore, knowing where to put what, I think we made that very complex. And I see that there's a role there for governments to change this, to make it simpler. So that means that you need to standardize the way that we separate materials. And I think we also need to make it more, it needs to make sense to separate materials. And for that to work, you need to be it needs to have value. So therefore, ensuring that there's incentives in place that these materials have value and that you want to separate it because it's worth something. And I think that's what's sometimes missing. And I think that's also why we are here at the COP28 to really remind these governments they need to start now with putting legislation into effect that will drive this. This can be done on the one hand by putting taxes on raw materials, so making recycled materials more interesting, or on the other hand saying if you want to produce a product and put it on the market, you have to use recycled materials. Because by doing that, producers will think, every time I put something on the market and that then disappears, the price of my input goes up. So I need to find a way that I can actually get that material back into my system so that I can keep selling. Because at the end of the day, these companies will go for profit and they will innovate to go for their profit. And I think one of the two needs to happen from governments to create a level playing field that drives innovation and into the right direction towards the circular economy.
But that is the mindset change, isn't it? It's not thinking of something that you're disposing of to make it go away. It's understanding the value of the things that you're disposing of.
Exactly. I think that is what it boils down to. And I think right now, some people realize this, but the money is not necessarily flowing to the person who disposes it. And that's also why we focus on businesses. Because if you're a business and you have a lot of cardboard, if you have tons of cardboard, we can actually pay an organization for their cardboard. And then they're incentivized to really separate it well, because that's when you extract more value. If you're a consumer today, that works quite differently, because if you separate your cardboard very well, there's no difference for you. And I think in the long term, there needs to be a reason for you to do it, besides feeling good about it, because only then can we let everybody do it.
Joost, pleasure to meet you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.